Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Hi, can you hear me? Hi, is the microphone working great? Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Amazing. Hi, can you hear me? Okay. So you can hear me, and this is my debate with Vaush. And I'm just going to get started. Give me a second, please. So this is a debate between me and socialist YouTuber Vaush. It's something he asked me to do, and I'm pretty excited for. I think the results could be very interesting. And I don't really know what else to say. May the best man win. I'm going to let Vaush on now, but now to see, can you all see me? Amazing. Okay. Okay. I will let Vaush on now. Hi. Do you hear me? How you doing?
I'm doing wonderfully. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain. I'm sorry about the delay. There were some technical problems, and I did one debate or I did one kind of Zoom YouTube interface like this before, but there was a glitch in my software, and so we had to figure it out. But I'm sorry I left you all waiting. I know you've been going for a bit of time.
Oh, ain't nothing. We were talking about cartoons the whole time. It was great.
Nice. My yeah, it's it's interesting. I think you could write a couple very interesting books on what cartoons symbolize in society. And like another big YouTuber, JJ McCullough, did a whole list of Canadian monster cartoons. And I thought that was a very funny book.
Yeah, well, any excuse to see people punching holes through mountains or shooting lasers out of their eyes. I just like it when it looks flashy.
Exactly.
I appreciate you hopping on.
Of course.
So I had a couple of questions. I don't formally structure anything, but I watched your video on social justice and a few videos later after that, and I had a couple of questions, concerns that I wanted to talk about with you.
Okay.
So I understand you mostly do historical content, which is not my field of expertise. I can't comment on it that substantively. But I do know that you've gotten some pushback for what you've put in those videos. And looking at your social justice video, I think I might understand a common trend. The main issue being, at least with regards to the social justice video, it feels like you came into that with a fairly strong pre-existing ideological bias, and all the information you had on all the many subjects that you touched on in that video, you pulled them together to narrativize them into a story consistent with your pre-existing beliefs. Like you looked up at the stars and you wanted to see a dinosaur, and it didn't really matter what the stars looked like. You had to find the dinosaur in the constellation. You know what I mean? So there were like a bunch of pieces of info there that I think were contradictory or didn't fit together that well, and it gave me the impression altogether that you were inconsistently reactionary in ways I wanted to talk about.
I disagree. So, as I've studied history, being fair and objective isn't giving 50-50 to both sides. Being fair and objective is looking for the truth and seeing where the truth leads you. And across history, you see periods of fanaticism. And we see a lot of the prerequisites for periods of fanaticism that exist today. And across history, you saw the French Revolution, you saw the religious fanaticism like the Puritans of the 17th century, you saw the Spanish Inquisition. Before that, you saw the flagellants after the Black Death, or guys that would basically whip themselves after the Black Death because they felt guilt, that they felt immense survivor's guilt they were still alive. And before that, you had you had all sorts of things across the ancient world and peasant rebellions in the Middle Ages as well. And the common thread between all of these is that when times get tough, like they are now, where basically average income has gone down, a lot of people live really hard lives in a lot of ways. And under those conditions, people get radicalized. And I think social justice is that radical movement. And I try to build my work for posterity. And because of that, I cannot stand aside when social justice, I think, is a radical movement, and to give it an objective opinion would be to state thus. And so my argument going into it was that social justice is radical, which I will prove as this debate goes along. But at the same time, I just wanted to make something that posterity would be able to look back upon, where every single era of history, you have the people who would basically say, we need to give both sides argument. And the truth is complicated. And because of that, you see all sorts of, no one side can hold the truth because no single worldview is capable of encapsulating it. But like before World War II, you saw people who thought that starting the war was not a good idea. Before World War I, you saw people who thought that war would never happen. And in every era of history, conventional opinion was wrong. And I want to look for when conventional opinion is wrong.
So the term radical doesn't really have a consistent definition, but the way you use it suggests to me that you think it has a negative bent. You know, if you're going to argue that social unrest is often caused by inequality or tumult, then I would agree with that. You could go back to the suffrage movement, the civil rights movement. You could go back to the abolitionist movement or the Revolutionary War. You could go back as far as you wanted. And yeah, generally, when things are a little bit less steady, people too tend to commit harder to more radical ideas. I guess the problem that I have with the framing in your video is that that's a good thing, at least in the context of the movements we're discussing now. I don't care about 50-50 representation for any given talking point, by the way. I only care about what's right. You know, you very specifically designate some types of social justice in your YouTube video as exempt from your criticism. Basically the civil rights movement and back before then, also environmentalism.
I'd like to cut you off there for a second, please.
Sure.
In your video, you said the civil rights movement and the abolitionist movement were descendants of are the ancestors of social justice, which is not true. Social justice is an entirely different historic chain that you see start in the 40s to the 90s, basically, the post-war period. And that's a long period, but it did take a bit of time to evolve. So
I'd like to challenge you on that.
Sorry?
How? The civil rights movement was in the 60s, of course, so that would fit within that time range.
The civil rights period, it was entirely different groups of people. When you look at the logic of the modern social justice movement, it takes ideas that were invented by former Marxists in the post-war period and two broad groups, the Frankfurt School and French philosophers. And for example, the idea that gender can be separated from sex, that's an idea that hasn't existed for any other period of history except with Simone de Beauvoir starting in the early 50s. And then that idea was taken up by other philosophers like Judith Butler, like Foucault. And so the idea that gender is separate from sex, again, postmodernist idea from that period, from academia.
Please, this is what I mean. Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to just go ahead and say a bunch of wrong things.
No, but I'd like to get
first of all, the civil.
You cannot construct my argument properly unless you hear it.
Well, but so far the construction is faulty. The concrete is cracking. The civil rights movement was informed by Marxist ideas. Marx was around like it absolutely was. The basis of critical theory, the idea that you should analyze. Well, don't get indignant already. It certainly was. Marxist social analysis has been influencing philosophers and activists for well over a century, and the conceptualization of gender and sex being, as you say it, uniform until the past 50 years is completely ahistorical. There are entire modern civilizations that have had third genders, clearly not three sexes, three genders, for hundreds of years. That's just simply not true. But even if there were conceptualizations of modern social justice, which are a product of postmodernism exclusively, I wouldn't have an issue with that. You know, you'd have to demonstrate the harm done by those ideas.
give me a couple, give me a hot second because I'm going to reply to each of those. So for the first of them, the social justice movement didn't have ties to, sorry, Freudian slip that I'm sure you wanted me to have. The civil rights movement didn't have Marxist ties because that was something that the FBI explicitly looked for. And people really tried to attach a Marxist label onto Martin Luther King, but he kept very clear from it. And
He wasn't a Marxist.
yeah, and much of the movement led by him did not have a lot of Marxist philosophy, because if they found a Marxist attachment to it, then the federal government would have basically just, federal government and racists in American society at the time would have just used it to pillory the movement. And so it explicitly kept away. And it didn't really come from Marxist roots, because if you look at the liberation movements of that period of history, they came mostly from a liberal background. So full male suffrage, that was something that started in the early 19th century and progressed as male suffrage is tied to the amount of your male population that fought in the military. And so that came through liberals across the 19th century, and it continued into the early 20th century. With the suffragette movement, suffragettes were mostly upper middle class women who, again, came from a liberal mindset. And when you look at liberalism, it's the idea that all people have equal worth, and the equal worth under the law. And liberalism is a philosophy that's in many ways derived from Christianity, and thus under the objective legal eye of God. And that's just not the philosophy for Marxism. If the civil rights movement was infiltrated by Marxists.
Wait, hold on. I have to interject here. I never said the civil rights movement was infiltrated by Marxists. I said that his ideas and the ideas of the civil rights movement were influenced by Marxist philosophy, which they were. Liberal philosophers, liberal political thinkers were influenced by what Marx wrote, because Marx was, well, he wasn't the only person who did this, certainly, but it's been mostly attributed to him, the ideas inherent to critical theory. Now, critical theory these days is taught to liberals and by liberals in a bunch of departments. It's not this like communist exclusive thing. They were pilloried as Marxist influenced the civil rights movement. Regardless of the extent of that influence, that was certainly something attributed to them.
I mean, realistically, everyone is influenced by every other philosopher. And give me a second to get back to some of the earlier points you made. But I mean, I'm influenced by Marx. I'm influenced by Marx. I'm also influenced by Zoroaster, Muhammad, by Foucault. And these ideas all mix together. And I don't see a trajectory from, I don't think it's useful to parcel out what percentage of each philosophy. And yes, you could find some Marxist influence in the civil rights movement, but I don't think it's useful. And a point you made in your rebuttal to my video was that the abolitionist movement is part of the same trajectory as modern social justice, which just has no basis. The abolitionists were built out of the radical Republican agenda, which was a subset of the Republican Party that existed mostly in the upper tier of northern states. And their platforms were, in fact, trying to settle the Western frontier. They were very pro-capitalist, very
This is an obfuscation.
They were
what
a remarkably imperialist party.
What I said,
also very pro-black.
This is a misinterpretation again. I did not say these were the same.
You literally
movements.
said that in my video.
No, I said that it was a continuation of the same historical trend. Now, obviously, if you say something is the continuation of the same historical trend and then go back 150 years, you will find that, in fact, earlier groups do have some different values. But the underlying trend is the acknowledgement of racial inequality and the desire to address it through civic, cultural, and legal systems to amend these problems both in representation and in economic outcomes. In that respect, that movement, the abolitionist movement, is identical to what we have today in many respects. Obviously, 150 years have passed. Settling the Western frontier isn't a cavalier idea in modern social justice movements. That's what it's all about, really, equality. And you can trace that back to the Enlightenment and further beyond if you really wanted to.
I mean, realistically, the idea of racial equality and using legality to address racial problems, it's in many cultures. You see it in Islam. You see it in Christian societies in the Middle Ages. And if you can't draw a trajectory through the people themselves, you're not going to find a realistic continuity. What
Oh,
happened to
sure.
those radical
So,
Republicans?
well,
They
the abolitionists that we
please let me
think of,
finish.
well,
What happened to those
you
radical
W.E.B. Du
Republicans?
Bois
They
or like
became
Frederick Douglass. And
middle-class people in the upper Midwest in New England. Meanwhile, the
what does
people
the
who
area
led
have
the
to
civil
do?
rights movement, they were predominantly Northeastern intellectuals who voted Democrat in the 1930s, as well as Jews who immigrated to Europe from 1900. I once went through a list of, I'm
But
writing a cultural history of
that
America,
doesn't have
and
anything
so
to
I'm
do
looking
with
through
the
the different
ideological,
trajectories of American ethnography.
but
And
that
one of the
has
things I
nothing
found
to
is that
do with
you
the
cannot find,
ideological through
you
line.
do not find, it's a totally different demographic
Wait,
where
we're not talking
radical
about
Republican
demographics.
parties,
Wait. What if all this?
intellectuals that are the
We're
modern
not
social
talking
justice
about
movement.
demographic. You can't say that two like similar ideas are dissimilar because one of them was formulated by like Southern groups and the other by people in the Northwest. We're talking about common ideas here, like racial equality, which does exist in many cultures. I've never said this is exclusive to the West, but the abolitionist thinkers, Frederick Douglass and so on, they wrote texts that were cited by Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King is currently the biggest, figure that's cited when talking about historical civil rights in the modern Black Lives Matter movement. So there is a definite continuous ideological trend from A to B to C. And I feel like the only reason you would deny that fact is because you like what the abolitionists did, but you don't like what BLM activists do today. And you have to explain that disconnect by somehow separating these extremely well-connected movements.
Bro, how many books on American intellectual history have you read? Give me some titles. Give me some book titles to back up what you're saying.
We're going right to that. Wait, you need a citation on
I just
Frederick
need to
Douglass
know that
was
you have
cited
read
by
on this
civil rights.
topic.
Wait,
For the radical
you need a
Republicans,
citation on Frederick Douglass was cited by civil rights thinkers. If you need a
I will
citation on that,
reference Battle Cry of Freedom to talk about the policies of the Radical Republican Party by James McPherson, Cynical Theory to look at the development of how
this is
the modern social justice
at its
movement
height
developed.
right now. Why not
For the
address what I've
Marxist movement
said?
in between, I'll quote The Rise and Fall of Communism.
If you've read so
Between
much,
each
then
of
why
those
not?
are three different ideological trajectories.
Why not
It's like
counter
saying
the
that
argument then?
because Confucian philosophy influenced in the Enlightenment Europe, that America is that Europe is a deviation of Chinese philosophy. It's creating a single logical line and then extrapolating an entire
we're
group
literally
identity from it.
talking about the same goals in the same country. You have the abolitionists who fought for racial equality for Black people, to the civil rights movement, which fought for racial equality for Black people, to the modern BLM movement, which fights for racial equality for Black people. And every single successive group quotes and heavily cites the preceding groups. This isn't like a butterfly flapped its wings in China, therefore that butterfly is responsible for the American Revolutionary War bullshit. This is a very direct line. And for you to respond to that with like how many books have you read suggests to me a kind of, I don't know, insecurity in your ability to refute that fact. Why don't you believe these are part of the same movement? They're clearly fighting for the same thing.
The fact that you bring up no historical examples between the leaders of said movements or show that you've done research on the topic, because no one among historians, I have read nowhere that the modern abolitionist movement is a direct descendant of is a direct ancestor of the modern social justice movement. And the fact that you provide no historical evidence, and I have made my point. I'd like to ask you a question when you're done with yours.
Well, you have to answer mine.
I've answered my question in the best way I can.
You've answered it by saying, I haven't read an answer to that. Like, you've answered my question by saying you don't know how to answer my question. I want a real answer.
I've answered your question in the way I will.
Okay. So then I will follow through on that and say, since these are clearly part of a contiguous social trend in the United States, from A to B to C, it seems odd to me that you would denounce social justice when it happened before, when it happens now, but you would accept it when it happens before. It's a really common trend in conservatives. Well, they'll go like, oh, of course I support the civil rights movement. And then they'll do all the same attacks on the modern BLM movement that conservatives did against the civil rights movement 50 years ago,
I have made my argument. You choose not to accept it. I'd like to ask you a question.
What was the argument? Can you repeat it for me?
No, I've already said it. The fans can go back and watch it.
What? But you didn't respond to it. You just said I haven't read in my books.
To briefly spend 5 seconds on this, I've said these movements are remarkably different demographics. You cannot trace a strong ideological lineage between them of
what do you mean
group
demographics?
Spoke to this group, which spoke to this group. Because of that, I think you are drawing a loose connection.
They're different generations. Of course, they're different demographics. They're separated.
I've answered the
by
question.
Like 50 years. Wait, do you not think a movement can be a part of the same contiguous like intellectual trend
It
if
is, but you need to have
the
proof for
different
it.
links in the chain are in different time periods?
Bro, give me an example of a academic school created by radical Republicans in the mid 19th century. Give me an
What are you
example of
talking
that
about?
school influencing modern East Coast, modern leftist movement. Give me
What
a historical lineage without just listing single figures.
can you wait? I'm sorry. Can you find an example of Simone de Beauvoir setting up any personal gender studies classes that teach that
Oh
gender
yeah,
and sex
that's
are different
easy.
things?
So
Oh, Simone de Beauvoir. You can?
Simone de Beauvoir had her philosophy influenced by Marx. Simone de Beauvoir then immigrated to America. She was part of the broader postmodernist movement. The postmodernist
Part
movement
of the broader
was in
postmodernist.
France
Oh,
in the
kind of like the
1950s.
abolitionists were part of the
Meanwhile, the
broader racial
Frankfurt,
equality movement.
the fact that you're interrupting me means that
You're winning.
you don't want me to finish. The Frankfurt School, meanwhile, immigrated to America. The Frankfurt School people immigrated to northeastern cities, going to schools like Columbia, Harvard, etc. Thus, from the Frankfurt, and they also read a tremendous amount of postmodernists.
Wait, so they
And
attended
so
these schools?
and you can see the postmodernist philosophers descended from you can see the modern social justice philosophers descendant from the postmodernism.
Wait,
where like
how?
Kimberly Crenshaw,
Wait, these are totally
Judith
different
Butler were
demographics.
students of Foucault. They were students of Marcuse. So
Okay,
and they
hold on.
literally write that. You can see that on their
Wait,
Wikipedia page.
so wait,
And then
earlier you
people in the
said,
modern
wait, please,
people in the modern
because
left
you
quote
run
those
on a
figures.
train, you try
see
to
a
make like
direct
30
lineage
points. Please,
from
you,
Marx and from Simone de
so
Beauvoir to the modern left.
You claimed, okay, that the teaching that gender and sex are separate is a product of like Frankfurt School postmodernist influence. So you now need to prove that postmodernists founded the American public school system.
They didn't.
Because only in, oh, they didn't. Well, then how can you say there's any connection whatsoever between postmodernism and the teaching of gender and sex being divergent concepts in modern public education? Those were set up by thinkers in the 19th and 20th centuries influenced by Enlightenment thinking. How could there possibly be any influence from postmodernism?
Ideas influence other ideas. Oxford is founded in the 12th century, but they're not teaching scholasticism anymore. And
what do you mean by that?
When you look
Ideas
at the
influence other
politics of
ideas.
teachers, they're overwhelmingly left wing. When you look at the politics of universities, overwhelmingly left wing.
You're doing a
These are
bunch of
people
points
who
again.
studied
What do you mean
under
ideas influence ideas?
I mean, if you want to simplify the whole world into a sentence, sure. But Vaush, there's a question I'd like to ask you.
No, wait, what do you mean? Because you said there's no way the abolitionist
please.
movement could inform
We've
the
spent
civil
half an
rights
hour
movement.
talking. We've spent 20 minutes on this question.
Well, it's very silly because
why are you trying to avoid my
essentially
question?
Admitted to not answering it. You said there's no way the
I
abolitionist
answered the
movement
question.
could
You're
have
not going
led
to
to
get
the
anything
civil
else
rights
out of me
movement.
past this. You're not going to
Because
get me to talk on this question anymore.
they're different demographics. And then you said I'd need to show that a Republican abolitionist school set up and then is being cited by West Coast intellectuals today. But then you're like, well, Frankfurt's responsible for all of modern education, teaching gender and sex are separately because like these, you realize these are incompatible talking points. You can't run away from that. You can't believe both of those things at the same time.
Bro, I answered the question. Like
you answered it wrong. You were incorrect. All right. Okay. Yeah. Ask me a question. We'll
okay.
Take turns.
In the rebuttal to my video, you said that international productivity statistics, the only way you can argue them is since racism, because every single area of the world really has the same productivity. Would like to back that up, please?
You're going to need to specify more. What did I say?
So you said, for example, I said that people in the third world are paid less than people in the first world because they have lower productivity rates. Thus, according to market standards, you cannot pay them less and have a functioning economy. You said that according to what you have found, that all areas of the world have the same productivity. And so the only way you can use that argument is racism.
Nobody's paid for their productivity.
Yeah, they are.
No,
wages across history, and you can run computer models for this. Wages across history are a combination of scarcity of labor and productivity. So there's a couple historians like Angus Madison and Peter Turchin who do a really wonderful job of creating computer models to predict wages across history using those metrics, and the problem they get it right.
You were asked me a question. The problem with computer models is that people think the output is objective, when in fact the output is largely determined by the preceding input that humans put in. There have been studies shown indicating that in terms of the actual physical productivity, the actual amount of goods produced by a factory worker in China, Mexico, and America, you're not going to see significant differences in productivity. You will see significant differences in pay. The reason for that, well, it's complicated, but the idea of wages tracking perfectly on their productivity is just not true. In fact, often people in China and Mexico work quite a bit harder than we do in factories that are just as productive as ours, funnily enough. They can make, cars or cheap widgets at the speeds we can or better. It's entirely doable. The issue that I have is that oftentimes people will use productivity as a kind of moralistic presupposition by which they like determine the worth and the value of a country. Often the economic output of a country is determined by the wealth of that country, so it's kind of like a cyclical problem, right? There could be two countries, one very wealthy, one very poor, where the poorer country produces far less, not as a product of any actual tendency to work from the people who live there, but rather just because they don't have access to the startup capital. And then they get lower wages for what? Well, not for working less hard, for having the misfortune of being born into a poorer country. That's the issue that I have.
That's the theory you posit would result in the collapse of the modern world economy if it was enacted.
That's such a libertarian answer. I love that. Continue.
But
please.
The thing is, and also you would not find a single economist who could agree with that, or you could not find more than a handful in extremely radical sects.
How would it collapse things?
And that's because productivity stats vary massively by nation, and that there's no way else it could be, because you have different amounts, different quality of machinery in different areas. You have people who work differing amount of hours. You have differing supply chains involved.
Do you think,
for
workers
example,
in China
people in Mexico are exceptionally hardworking, but the coal doesn't get to where they are. The coal, let's say they're running a factory, the coal doesn't get there. They're working on poor machines. Their wages get stolen, so they leave work. The Mexicans would be extremely hardworking, but they would have lower productivity. And what you say about countries not getting capital, that's not true. This is the era of the highest capital availability in the history of man.
Do you think Mexico gets the same capital investment as the
U.S. has given 4 times the amount of capital to Africa than the Marshall Plan. If you look at countries like Argentina hyperinflates its currency on average every 11 years.
This is completely irrelevant.
And because of that, but they keep on getting Western capital since there's so much capital.
That has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Do you think growth in the third world?
Do you think Mexico has the same capital investment per capita in terms of their industry, as America?
Sorry, who?
Do you think that America and Mexico have the same amount of startup capital available for people to start and develop businesses within their
countries? That's due to a shit ton of historic factors.
Yeah, but do you agree? Wait.
Why are we paring down historic factors down to
agree. Wait, one thing at a time.
America has different geography. It has a different history. It has a different governing system.
Yes, I agree.
So why is all of that being compressed down to racism?
I agree. Wait, hold on. Calm down.
You said that the only
oh my God, please.
Differences in productivity
I'm begging
is racism.
Calm.
Please explain.
I wasn't accusing you of being racist right here. I was
literally
asking
said
you.
That.
Calm.
Go back into the video.
Quit being
it's like
defensive.
the 14-minute mark. Go ahead and look at it.
Oh my God, please. I'm begging you. I was asking you a question. I was asking you a yes/no question at the beginning before I answer. Please, this isn't a gotcha. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to answer the damn question. Gotchas. No, I don't. I don't gotcha
it's your
people.
Entire fucking channel.
They walk directly into walls over and over again. I'm not trying to gotcha anyone, okay? I was asking, I just asked you, you acknowledge these countries have different capital available for business development, which of course, obviously they do. No one would argue that. Yes, it's because of historical factors. I'm not denying that. We're not at the racist part yet, okay? So the studies that I've seen on relative worker productivity have been pretty consistent. The idea that a Chinese worker... I don't have any, but if you'd like me to send them to you later, I'd be happy to pull them up. I don't have all the archive right now.
How many economics books have you read? Give me your top 3.
All of them.
Give me your top 3.
I can't. I enjoy all of them equally.
Okay.
So anyway, I hope you understand that behavior like that is very unbecoming in immediate conversation. It just makes it seem like you don't have an argument for the field, so you have to run back to the bleachers. Look, in China, factory or sweatshop workers, okay? From what I've read, and this seems to be pretty consistent, they produce as much or more than factory workers here in America. It's not like factories in China are like underproducing. It's like an industrial powerhouse of the planet, but they still get paid way, way, way less. Now, you said that the world economy would be torn apart by the idea that wages aren't proportional to productivity, which is a very funny and very libertarian thing to say. It's like, if my 101 econ models aren't perfectly predictive of the most complicated system in all of human existence,
You have a better
I
theory
don't
of the
know,
world
then
than
the idea
productivity?
that then the idea that wages track perfectly onto productivity.
Yeah. Do you have an idea? Can you have something you can shove into a computer simulation? Wages come out. Wages
Nobody
as they've
can.
existed over the last 1,000 years.
Nobody can.
Yes, they can.
Absolutely, they
There's
cannot.
loads of historians, Peter Turchin, Angus Madison, who have been able to predict wages across history
You can
from the
predict.
variables of productivity
Wait,
and wage
averages?
supply. Yeah.
Wait, averages? Well, I thought we're talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
productivity.
So,
Wouldn't
for
productivity
example,
vary between
the Turchin
individuals and a
economic
population?
models were able to predict wages across England from looking at the population and the product and the
We're
land
not talking
availability
about
and
averages.
productivity.
What would that have to do with productivity?
It's
Averages.
medieval England. Your productivity is attached to how much soil you have. And for example, you can look at stats across the 19th century, look at increases in mechanization and increases in industrial ability. And then
This,
from that,
so I'm
attach
gonna try this a third
population to
time.
that and get wages
What
out.
does this have to do with productivity? Averages, when you look at averages, you're looking at like a total social development, not productivity. If we want to find a model that determines wages based on productivity, you'd have to have a very specific and very fine-tuned algorithm that you could punch a bunch of pre-existing characteristics into and get an individual's wages. Because otherwise, we're not really talking about productivity. We're talking about like available wealth in a society. And that I agree with. On average, you can.
Yeah, and we can get individuals' wages. It's median income versus average income versus gross GDP. And the stuff I'm talking about is talking about average income and median income. What I'm talking about is very little relation to gross national GDP.
Wait, how would you arrive at predicting an individual's income?
It's easy. You look what their productivity is.
How?
Basically, the amount of capital they produce. And
how do you measure that?
It differs from society to society. In agrarian societies, it's farmland and productivity of said farmland. In industrial societies, it is their productivity from said factory.
In a modern service economy, how would you even begin?
You would, in a modern service economy, you would, so let's say you take Starbucks as a business. You took at the total revenue of said Starbucks. You look at the amount of coffees made per individual. You look at the amount of revenue from the Starbucks. You look at how it's cleaned. I know it's imperfect, but once you get averages, all of these things are cleaned up. And technically, Vaush, the train of logic you're operating under basically says science and academia cannot exist.
Wait, but you're proving me right. People the barista gets paid the same amount whether they work a morning shift in a downtown location or the evening shift in a rural location that gets 100th the amount of customers. They get paid the same amount as long as they're in the same state.
But on a macro scale, it alternates over time according to broader productivity variables.
Macro, I thought we were looking at individuals. Macro,
you divide up global productivity stats and then put it on individuals. Like, I'm not going to educate you for an hour and a half.
No, this is exactly the problem. There's no way to determine productivity empirically when looking at individual statistics because all you can defer to is broader economic trends.
I'll send you all this stuff on Twitter after. I'm not going to waste the audience's time for an hour talking about this.
Feel free to. So okay. The point that
I'd like to move on to another question.
Oh, I didn't even get to why it was racist, but yeah, okay.
Okay. In my video, since communism has failed on every single continent in every single civilization, and why do you consider yourself an anarcho-syndicalist in basing your theories upon a theory of the world that doesn't seem to have matched up to scientific standards?
What scientific standards have my personal beliefs not matched up to?
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, I'm not you, Vaush. I don't know your life, but why would you push this view upon the world?
Well, for a number of reasons. Obviously,
I mean, sorry to cut you off, but I have a final question. How would an anarchist state manage a war with an external power or manage a financial crash? Actually, no. How would an anarchist state manage a war with an external foreign power? Let's say your anarchist France and Germany invades. How do you get a military together and negotiate a foreign policy?
I don't think anarchism can survive outside of a global model. I don't advocate for it unless you're in some
And
kind
why
of
would a global model
hypothetical ideology.
exist?
Well, if the world was ready to move to anarchism, I
And why
consider
would the
this a
world move
highly
towards this
idyllic,
progression?
because I think that anarchism is the logical end state of a series of pre-existing social, economic, and political factors, which I do think are desirable in and of themselves. And then ideally, after those have sort of fermented across the world, you would have an opportunity for global anarchism. But I consider that a very distant, like that's very much like a, rapture moment, ye off in the distance. Until then, I care mostly about the advocacy of anarchist principles, if
Okay.
the society is a bit out of reach for now.
So, what would examples of anarchist policies you push be?
Um, policies of it. Oh, okay, a little bit of a
Yeah.
contradiction there, but I get what you mean. Of course, you
So
work
how
within
would
the
how would
systems.
okay? Let me.
No,
Let
no,
me go ahead.
policies in line with anarchist political beliefs.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
You as Vaush, as an individual, what are policies that you think will lead us towards said anarchist utopia?
Oh, well, that's you're putting a big weight on my shoulders here.
I mean, you're a
Um,
political thinker. It's your job.
Well, yeah, though legislating anarchism is definitely a tall order. But so a couple of things. Obviously, I think taxes should be higher. I think the fruits of those taxation, should be put towards a welfare state. I think that severe regulatory penalties can be placed on the financial markets and higher specific taxes on the wealthy, on capital gains.
Okay.
And I think a sort of financial easing into market socialism would be something that I find ideal. With the idea being you eliminate the bourgeois as a class, you ensure that industry is controlled collectively by the proletariat. Nationalize a few industries. I can think of a few that could do for a little bit of a takeover, that kind of stuff.
Such
And
as
it'd be very complicated long term. Such as
what industries would you like to nationalize?
the pharmaceutical industry is a big one. I think you can make a really strong
I honestly
argument.
I agree with that. I think
Okay.
I think government should control health.
Um, and also a massive takeover of local transit.
I agree
I'm a,
with
I'm,
that.
okay,
Actually,
yeah,
I agree
train
with it in
pilled.
some states, not others, because you see varying different attitudes towards government takeovers depending on the society. Where in like Sweden or South Korea, it goes very well, but in Italy or in Brazil, it goes terribly. So I would like, I'm from Philadelphia. Whatever the government controls is just, it doesn't work. But in Minnesota or Massachusetts, I'd support it.
I'll make the trains run on time. I'm well and train pilled. The energy industry will get that one.
Isn't
Stuff
that
like
like
that.
one of this? Isn't one like r slash neoliberal obsessed with trains?
Yeah, but we don't accept them. The lefties are more obsessed with trains. We like it more.
Hmm.
Trains are good. I like trains. An end to car dependency would be an ideal. My housing, my basic goal would be nationalize industries that have inelastic demand and worker control for everything else, and unions for workers within government enterprises, which of course cannot be controlled by the workers because they're ostensibly controlled by the people.
I don't think unions are controlled by the people. In Philadelphia, the union controls the city, and it literally like beats up its opponents, and it's led the city to have a smaller population today than it did in 1950.
No, I
You
mean
cannot
the
trust any
government's
single
controlled by the
social group,
people.
and I think that's a problem with leftists, where leftists will say we need to concentrate power in good people, but once you say we're going to concentrate power in good people, bad people start showing up because they get the label good
No, I
people.
mean the government's controlled by the people. The union's only ever
Is the
controlled
government
by the
controlled by the
workers.
people?
I said ostensibly.
Give me a country where I mean, you could say America, but like, how do you factor that in with the vast majority of governments across history being autocracies run by a kind of ruling class, like a nobility, like a secret police, like a priest class? And how do you do that with every single leftist country, with the exception of countries like Sweden per se, are
What
controlled?
leftist countries?
Almost every leftist country does end up autocratic.
Like
So
which?
why would giving the government more power mean it maintains being in the hands of the people?
Well, like what to what am I being compared here?
You're being compared to every single. Tell me what you are. Tell me what country you'd like to copy across
Well, I'm a
time.
social. I don't want to copy any countries. I'm not even a statist.
If you're
But
not
I don't think
copying
there are any.
countries, then you're shooting in the dark.
No, because we see policies that we know might work, and we can isolate them and
How do we
take a
know
look
they
at them
might
in
work?
application.
You know, let me
Because
tell you a story.
wait. Because you can take a look at isolated policies
Okay.
where they function in a given city or in a given state or in a given district, and you can try to determine the effect they'll have in a broader. And if we end up being a bit experimental, so were the founding fathers. Okay,
Yeah.
the apple has not fallen far from the cherry tree.
Which is something I've seen across history, where every single state that tries to deviate from a norm of what the pre-established principle is fails. French Revolution killed millions of people. Russian
What about
Revolution killed
us?
millions of people. Chinese Revolution killed millions of people. Taiping Rebellion, which is a Christian fanatical sect in China, third bloodiest war in history. Every single time you try to make a revolution, make a new utopia fails. And
What about
revolutions that
us?
succeed are those that work upon pre-existing systems, like the Glorious Revolution in the UK, the American Revolution, Europe, and others. And I'm glad we agree on that.
Wait, all these revolutions were predicated, at least in some respect, off of the society they were built upon.
So is everything.
Right. I don't think the French Revolution was any more a rejection of the previous principles of its nation
Yes, it
than the
was.
American was for the
It was
colonies
totally
that it
was,
came
bro.
from.
Like they in the French Revolution. Let me
So was
finish. The
America.
French Revolution outlawed religion. It killed hundreds of thousands of people. It created total suffrage. It renamed the names of the weak. It killed 5% of the population or the nobility. It took the entire economy into the state's hands in the Revolutionary War. The US Revolution basically just said, you can keep your colonial legislatures, but we're getting rid of England, and
But
we're going to make a really weak centralized
all the
government.
things the French Revolution did were based on Enlightenment principles, which was the ideological history
So is the
of that
American
nation.
Revolution.
I agree. That's my point. Yeah, I think that these revolutions are just difficult business, and sometimes they succeed and sometimes they don't.
But if
But
every
I'm not
revolution
talking
that
about
tries to
revolution.
break from
I've never
precedent
mentioned
fails,
revolution for
if you
my
can trace that
system.
back to ancient history, why would you go with that precedent? Why wouldn't you follow the precedents that work?
Neither did. Do you think that they were following
The
a
American
precedent when
Revolution
they
followed the
became? Wait,
precedents.
please. You think they were
Please.
following a precedent when America became a democracy? Of course
Yeah.
not. Obviously not.
England was a democracy beforehand. All of the
Wait,
local governments kept their power in America.
Wait. How is England a democracy?
It was a parliamentary system.
Wait, hold on.
They had two separate parties, the Whigs and the Tories. They would alternate power. You had prime ministers, all that stuff. Also, got to tell you, I need to run at 9.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. My bad. I understand. It was a monarchy.
But it's like Britain today, but to a lesser degree. It was a monarchy with a republic, with a monarchy with it was a monarchy with a democracy as well. The Americans just couldn't vote and said democracy, because the Americans were treated under the British system like they were a subject nation that Britain conquered, like India. But at the same time, the Americans said that they were Englishmen and thus deserved to get voting rights.
It was not a democracy. It was a parliamentary monarchy.
Bro,
but
are we going to say the only democracy in the world are New England town halls?
The most powerful person in England was there by blood. In America, the most powerful person, Washington, was elected, admittedly by white landlords. So
that's not true. 70% of them. Oh, yeah, landowners is accurate for the South.
Yeah,
but in the North, almost everyone could vote. Yeah, but I mean, by that logic, Britain is not a democracy today.
No, because the Queen doesn't have any power now. The function of the
most
government.
Powerful people in Britain, the people making the most decisions at the time, were prime ministers. Lord North was the guy who Lord North, the prime minister of the Tory party, was the guy that masterminded the American Revolutionary War.
The king had enormous power at the time that we left. No, this is highly tangential.
Okay,
you said you have to leave in 7 minutes.
Then it's an integrated system. It's part democracy, part monarchy. Okay.
So let's try to get to the heart of this. Okay.
There was experimentation. They also pulled in the Greeks and the Romans and several Native American states in the New World.
Sure, and Marx did as well. Marx's theories were derived almost entirely from Hegelian insights.
But Hegel didn't build a state. Hegel was just some nerd in Germany. Hegel never built an empire. For America, we were building it upon a precedent of pre-existing states.
I'm not talking about state making. I'm only talking about what.
But Marx made a philosophy that people built states off. The Marxist Bible, basically Das Kapital, is them using a philosopher's view to construct an entire civilization. And whenever that happens, it fails.
Okay, I don't think they really did much with Marxist theories to build the USSR.
They literally had classes in the Soviet Union and China. I have Chinese friends. They studied Marxist texts in school.
And?
Like Lenin would quote
they didn't
Marx
apply
when
them.
he made decisions.
Trust me, I know enough about the Soviet Union to know that it's about as communist as Nazi Germany was. I have no respect for the Soviet Union.
What separates the theory of true communism from the Christian kingdom of heaven?
Because you can take a look at what the USSR was doing, and none of it had anything to do with the political. Why can you say real communism? Why do you interrupt?
Why can't you say real fascism has been tried by that logic?
Wait, no, hold on. Because when fascists say, I want X to happen, and then you look at Nazi Germany, that happened. When you take a look at what Marx said he wanted to happen, and then look at the USSR, none of it happened. Nothing, literally nothing. There's no relationship. Again, you can do this No True Scotsman all you want, and I agree, okay? There are always thresholds, fine lines you can draw, but no, I don't own up to any of that. You take a look at Marxist theory, and then you take a look at the USSR, no relationship at all.
Let me break this down. Communism has been tried in many different forms. It's been tried with Bolivarian communism in South America. It's been tried under Castro, which was very independent from the Soviet Union.
You know, for a person who claims to be an intellectual, you sure do like going on like bumper sticker tangents.
It's been tried under a Marxist Trotskyite version. There's third world socialism, which took over
so,
a majority
wait,
of
I have to ask sincerely,
socialism in India.
Given we have so little time to talk, is there a reason why you're filibustering?
They were reading Marx and then reading this text, treating it as a Bible, and then trying their own thing. And each
WhatifAltHist
failed.
I have to ask: are you filibustering because you have 4 minutes left?
Are impossible.
Let me
finish one quick.
No, wait. We're 4 minutes till you have to go, which you announced 3 minutes ago, and you're filibustering with something that has nothing to do with anything I've talked about. Okay, this has been your response to every point you don't have an answer to. You run off to the next thing, or you say indignantly. You sound indignantly like, well, I've already answered that by not answering it. You're not engaging with the thing that I'm saying.
This is all stuff you've done in your past debates, bro. You're just
past debates. Yeah. Come on. You can't be mad about how this one is going. So pretend that you have some kind of history of my behavior to call upon. We talked privately before this convo. You were fine and civil. Now you're here filibustering. What's changed? Nothing but your nerves.
What changes the precedent you set that I followed?
Your nerves. WhatifAltHist.
Okay. Maybe
so you have to leave in 3 minutes. Should we talk now about which countries you think are communist, or is there some underlying position you would like to arrive at? What's wrong with social justice?
It doesn't work.
How not?
I don't have 3 minutes to answer.
It worked before. Worked during the abolitionist days, suffragist days, civil rights movement, second wave feminist movement.
Let me
in a manner which you're not able to describe, define, or delineate.
I describe it as a philosophy based off the combination of the Frankfurt and the postmodernist school.
What's wrong with postmodernism?
That is built upon the theory that power is the ultimate relationship of power is the ultimate relationship inside human societies, and the purpose of a society is to fight against said oppression, and that we should structure our civilization around combating the oppression that comes from.
Do you like fighting oppression?
And built upon the theory that there are no social relationships outside power.
Don't you think that we should fight oppression? And also, they don't claim there are no social relations outside power.
I think we should be critical and intelligent about it, rather than just trying to slide everyone into a black or white worldview based on whether or not they fight oppression.
Wait, hold on. You think postmodernism, the philosophy around believing there's no objective truth or narrative, slides people into black or white sides?
Yeah,
isn't that mutually contradictory?
That's obvious to anyone who's looking at this critically.
Wait, so it's an ideology which rejects empirical truth and encourages a multifaceted approach towards social analysis.
There's balance
to
everything.
Also, you think
the people who would say look, the way people often work is that they put on a facade and they're really the opposite. And social justice did that. It put on It put on a facade of what its dominant. They put on a facade, and then through that facade, it basically allowed itself to do the exact opposite.
They've duped
because they thought they were rid of it, and that's the case with all humans. We all need to achieve balance, and so when we say one thing too loudly, we're probably going to end up doing the other. I need to get going, but do you have any last statements, man?
So they do one thing, but then the other, and their ideology says one thing, but they act the other way because source trust me, and because they're two-faced.
Yeah. I mean,
That's so your
I have
response,
a
your
minute left to
response to
answer, so I can't give you a good answer.
the theory of postmodernism is that they're lying.
You would need to break that down, but I don't have time. So take care.
All right. Have a good
day.
one.
Bye.